Chapter 1. When they chose the bride, I chose the role. They thought I was marrying into their empire. They didn't know I owned the cameras. On the day they tried to turn my wedding into a brand campaign, I turned it into a live confession. Every lie, every email, every promise streamed to the world. I was supposed to be their perfect bride, but I became the headline they couldn't control. My name is Isabella Hartman, and this was never about love. It was about truth. I remember the first time I saw my name printed beneath the words, Sterling Wedding. It wasn't on an invitation or a headline. It was on a production schedule. I was the bride, but according to the Sterling family, I was also the project. My name is Isabella Hartman. I am 33 years old and have spent most of my adult life building stories for other people. For the past decade, I've run campaigns that turned corporations into household names. My firm specialized in crisis management. I had seen reputations crash and rise again with the right angle, the right light, the right silence. Maybe that is why I didn't notice at first when my own life started to look like a campaign. When I met Nathaniel Sterling, he didn't talk about business. He talked about calm, about being tired of the spotlight. He was charming in that polished, quiet way men from old families learn young. At 35, he was vice president of Sterling Media, the company his parents had built out of Manhattan before I was born. He told me he wanted someone who understood pressure but didn't crave it. I believed him. By the time we got engaged, I had stepped back from my firm. I wanted to build something simpler, more personal. The Sterling family saw that as an opportunity. Within weeks, wedding planners were replaced by corporate event managers. Eleanor Sterling, Nathaniel's mother, took charge of every detail. She was 58, elegant and terrifying in the way people are when they've never been told no. The first time we met to discuss the wedding, she brought a PowerPoint. There were charts, demographics, audience engagement strategies. The Sterling Foundation had been losing donors. A televised society event would, she said, remind the public what the family stood for. I sat across from her at a marble table, trying to decide if she was joking. She wasn't. She smiled without warmth and said, "You don't need to worry about the logistics, dear. You just need to look happy. Leave the story to us." Nathaniel sat beside her, nodding absently, scrolling through his phone. I waited for him to say something to remind her this was our day, not a broadcast. He didn't. Over the next few weeks, every decision came pre-packaged. The venue wasn't chosen for sentiment, but for its drone accessibility. The floral palette matched Sterling Media's logo. Even the vows were to be brief and brand appropriate. I kept my voice even, my face calm. Years in public relations had taught me that emotion was currency, and I never spent mine without purpose. The ballroom at the Sterling estate in Bridgehampton looked more like a product launch than a wedding venue. There were lighting rigs banners reading Sterling Legacy and a production crew from their in-house media division. A week before the wedding, I arrived for a walkthrough. Cameras were being tested, angles adjusted. Eleanor greeted me in her tailored cream suit, clipboard in hand. "This will be breathtaking," she said, gesturing toward the ceiling where chandeliers glowed against mirrors engraved with the Sterling crest. "We want the world to see how family values never go out of style." I smiled, polite professional. "Whose family are we talking about exactly?" Her eyes flicked toward me, sharp assessing. "You'll do fine, Isabella. You photograph beautifully." That night, Nathaniel called. He asked if I could attend another press dinner in the city with him and his parents. I told him I was exhausted. He laughed, said, "You're a PR professional, love. You know how this works. Optics matter." Then he hung up. I stared at the phone until the screen went dark. The next morning, during the final gown fitting, Eleanor arrived with her assistant and a stylist from Los Angeles. The room smelled of roses and static. I stood on the platform as the seamstress pinned the hem. Eleanor watched from a velvet chair, sipping champagne at 10 in the morning. "She's our most expensive PR project this year," she said to the stylist. "But worth every cent." The words hit harder than I expected, not because they were cruel, but because they were true in her mind. I looked at myself in the mirror. The gown was stunning, every stitch perfect, every detail controlled. The woman in the reflection didn't look like me. She looked like an advertisement for the life the Sterlings wanted to sell. I didn't speak. I didn't cry. I smiled faintly, the same practice smile I had used with difficult clients for years. Then I waited until Eleanor left the room. When the door closed, I took a slow breath and said quietly to the stylist, "Can you excuse me for a moment?" She nodded, busy folding fabric. I stepped out into the hallway, pulled my phone from my clutch, and dialed a number I hadn't used in months. "Lydia," I said when she answered. Her voice brightened instantly. "Isabella Hartman in the flesh. I thought you disappeared into designer purgatory." "How's the wedding circus?" "Performing as expected," I replied. "I need a favor, a quiet one." Lydia had been my producer when I still ran Hartman Agency. We had handled crisis campaigns for politicians' CEOs, the kind of people who believed money could erase shame. She knew better than anyone what silence could hide and reveal. "I need every piece of Sterling Media data you can legally pull," I said softly. "Emails, sponsorships, internal budgets, any files tied to the wedding project. Keep it discreet. No digital footprint." There was a pause. "You're not planning a war, are you?" I glanced through the glass doors at the ballroom being prepared for my ceremony, the Sterling logo already projected across the wall like a watermark. "No," I said. "Just documentation." Lydia hesitated, then laughed quietly. "You always did like your receipts." "Still do," I said. "Start tonight. I'll handle the rest." After the call, I stayed in the empty hallway listening to the distant sound of hammers and music tests. I thought about how many times I'd built narratives for people like Eleanor, people who believed stories could save them from truth. The irony was perfect. That evening, I returned to the estate after everyone had left. The ballroom lights were still on, bathing the room in gold. On the far wall, the phrase "presented by Sterling Media" glowed in white serif letters. Beneath it, an empty stage waited for a bride who no longer existed. I stood there for a long time, feeling the air hum with quiet electricity, the kind that comes before a storm. If they wanted a spectacle, I would give them one. If they wanted control, I would give them proof. I looked at the lights, at the banners, at the flawless illusion they'd built, and whispered to the room as if it were listening. "They chose the bride," I said, voice steady, almost amused. "I chose the role. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you." Chapter 2: The Game of Smiles and Secrets. I let the empty ballroom hold my breath for me. Then I turned off the work lights and walked out into the cool night. The next time I would see that room, it would be dressed like a cathedral to a family name, not to a marriage. A week before the ceremony, the Sterlings staged a press gala at the plaza. They called it "Love Meets Legacy" on the invitation, embossed script, and glossy cardstock, and a subtle scent, as if paper could wear perfume. The ballroom there was a different kind of theater, reporters in black suits, society pages mingling with business writers, a violin quartet playing familiar songs at a tempo that sounded expensive. Nathaniel's hand rested on the small of my back, just long enough for photographs at the step and repeat, then slipped away when the flashes moved on. Eleanor was already in motion, moving through the room as if every conversation were a camera angle. A coordinator pressed a printed page into my hand near the stage. The speech they wanted me to give was brief and pristine. It used phrases I had written 100 times for other clients. Then one line stopped me. "Elevate the Sterling brand through the image of a bride with humble origins." I felt the familiar prickle behind my eyes, and then the familiar discipline smother it. I folded the paper once and slid it into my clutch. When the MC called my name, I walked to the mic with the easy smile I had learned long ago. I could feel Eleanor's expectation behind it like a wire drawn tight. The room settled. I thanked the guests for coming. I thanked the staff. I looked at the bank of cameras at the back of the room and for a heartbeat saw myself as a viewer would. A woman framed by flowers and light being introduced as a symbol. I said that real love had never needed a strategy, that sometimes our best moments happened off script, and that perhaps we forget that when the lights are this bright. My voice was even and calm. There were a few scattered laughs, the kind people give when they are not sure if a joke has been told. Nathaniel's smile flatlined. Eleanor's mouth did not move, but her eyes did. The violinist started again too quickly. After the speeches, we were paraded table to table. Donors, board members, a retired anchor with immaculate hair asked me about my favorite childhood memory of the plaza. I told her honestly that I had never been here as a child. She laughed as if I had made a charming joke, then turned to greet a producer on her left. Nathaniel excused himself to take a call and never came back to my side. When I finally found him near the bar, he was messaging on his phone, thumb moving with a focus I now recognized as secrecy, not urgency. He looked up and saw me. Optics tonight, he said, in that low voice meant for one person and for anyone who might be watching. Keep it light. I said I always did. On the ride back downtown, the car smelled faintly of cologne and leather. Nathaniel scrolled again, screen glow reflecting on the window. You surprised my mother, he said, without looking at me. Did I? I said. She had a plan for that moment. I said I noticed. He slid the phone into his jacket finally and turned. You know how these things go, Isabella. You wrote the book. I said I had never written one about a wedding. He smiled the smile that had charmed me once. Then write a new chapter. He kissed my cheek at the curb outside the apartment and walked away, already calling someone else by name. I watched him disappear into the lobby of his parents' building, because that was where he slept when his schedule was late, because that was easier, because legacy is a place as much as a story. Upstairs, I poured water and sat at the kitchen counter with the lights off. My phone buzzed with messages from photographers who had loved the lighting, and from acquaintances who had loved my dress, and from Lydia, who sent a single line. Your speech landed. I typed back a thank you, and then without letting myself think about it, I opened Nathaniel's message thread on the shared tablet he had once asked me to set up for him. He had never changed the sync because he had never expected me to need the proof. The most recent contact at the top was saved as MC. The preview showed a sentence fragment that tasted like metal in my mouth. After the wedding, we reset the brand. I opened it. The thread was not long, but it was clean and cold and transactional. He wrote about the narrative turning point, about public sentiment, about how the foundation would benefit from a fresh story once the union was official. He used the phrase, "She is a temporary coat of paint." He attached an internal calendar that mapped our ceremony to a series of investor touchpoints. He called the next quarter a harvest. I stood so fast the stool scraped tile. Then I sat again and made myself read it twice, not to suffer but to catalog. I took screenshots and sent them to a private archive Lydia had built for me when we worked on a senator's crisis 5 years earlier. I wrote a note in the file. Ethical evidence, not for vengeance, for air. The apartment was very quiet. I remembered the first night Nathaniel had cooked in my old walk-up in Brooklyn. Burned garlic, a crooked laugh, a promise that he was tired of shows. He had meant it in that moment. People mean their promises most when they are terrified of losing what they want. Later, when they feel safe again, they forget the cost of fear. I slept a few hours and woke before sunrise with a clarity that felt like cold water. I walked to the window and watched the city turn on. Taxi roofs blooming in the street, dog walkers in coats drawn tight, a courier with a stack of bakery boxes balanced like a magic trick. I made coffee. I opened my laptop. I wrote a list that began with 3 words: no improvisation today. 2 years earlier, I had been in a very different Plaza ballroom guiding a very different kind of press conference. Sterling Media had stumbled over a data scandal involving a client platform. Not illegal, just invasive, the kind of thing that tastes worse than it looks. I had built the plan that staved off the avalanche. 16 hours a day, every day, for 3 weeks. We repaired the story with transparency and contrition and an aggressive philanthropy plan that redirected attention without lying. When the dust settled, Eleanor called me family. She sent flowers that arrived in a van. Nathaniel asked me to dinner and talked about quiet. I remember thinking then that legacy could be made good if you kept its hands open. Now, in the glow of a kitchen light and a string of texts that smelled like fresh paint and thinner, I recognized that the same tools that saved a company could save a person. I had taught too many people how to hide to pretend I did not know how to reveal. By mid-morning, I was at the Hartman agency office that no longer bore my name on the lease. I still had a key and a cordial relationship with the team I had trained. They let me work at a corner desk near the storage room. It smelled like paper and old plans. I pulled a box labeled Archive Wedding and set it on the floor. I needed one contract: production and broadcast rights. I knew it existed because I had seen my own signature on a draft months earlier and then been told the legal division would handle the rest. I read every line of the final version. Near the end, tucked where people stop reading, sat the phrase I wanted. Production partner, Hartman Agency. Ancillary content ownership reserved to original producer unless otherwise transferred. There was no transfer recorded. There was a signature from a sterling attorney. There was a date. There was my eligibility intact and sleeping. I took a photo with my phone and sent it to Lydia with a short note. Confirm. She replied in under 5 minutes. Confirmed and mirrored, she wrote. Then she added a smile I could hear without seeing. Look at you keeping the receipts. I printed 2 copies and slid them into a red folder. Then I stepped into the hall and called a man I had not needed to call for a long time. He answered on the second ring. Marcus speaking. I said that I needed his eyes on a contract. He said bring it to my office or send a scan. I said I was on my way. Marcus kept an office in a pre-war building near Bryant Park. Dark wood green lamp shades the smell of old books and the modern hum of quiet power. He read without commentary while I watched the second hand on a small clock walk around its face. When he finished, he tapped the page where my name lived as producer. This is active, he said. If anyone tries to argue they reassigned, they will need to produce the document. You have the original covenant language. That is not nothing. I asked if there was any risk that airing unflattering content at my wedding could be construed as defamation. He shook his head. Truth is a defense. Consent in a public event with a pre-existing production contract adds another layer of protection. The only risk would be if you falsified records. You do not do that. I told him I did not and never would. He leaned back. What do you want to do, Isabella? I said I wanted exactly what the contract promised. A fair record. No spin, no lies, no cruelty. He nodded as if that answer had unlocked the conversation he had hoped we would have. Then you keep everything clean. Chain of custody for files, metadata preserved, timestamp every element. If you show anything, it must be something you can swear to. I said that had always been my standard. He smiled a little. It is why I take your calls. When I stood to leave, he asked for the date of the ceremony. I told him. He wrote it in a small leather notebook. Then he said very softly that he would be available that day if I needed him. Outside the park, trees were wrapped in early fall. I walked without hurrying. I let my mind arrange the pieces the way I used to when a client's disaster walked in wearing a smile. A talker would have told Lydia to pull the loudest clip. A burner would have sent screenshots to gossip accounts and called it justice. I am not a talker or a burner. I am a builder. Even when I am tearing down a false front, I am building a record. That night, Nathaniel texted a photo from a tasting with his parents. Plates of artful food, a candle in a glass, his hand on the stem of a wine glass. Wish you could have made it, he wrote. Big day is coming fast. I wrote back that I was finalizing personal details. He replied with a heart and sent another message to MC at the same minute. I saw it on the tablet later because old habits do not die when you are complacent. He asked her to prepare a draft of a post-wedding statement. He wrote that the union would signal a new chapter for the Sterling brand. I took the tablet to the window and watched my reflection hold it. I did not rage. I did not cry. I cataloged. I labeled the folder in the archive. Ethics, not rage. 2 days later, Eleanor hosted a brunch at the estate for a handful of society editors. I attended, wore a dress they had chosen, answered questions like a professional. One editor asked where I had purchased the silver cuff on my wrist. I told her a small shop near Atlantic Avenue. She pretended to know it, then told me she could not wait to see the ceremony on the live stream. I lifted my teacup and held her gaze. Neither could I. When the guests left, Eleanor walked me through the ballroom again. She pointed to the camera stations and explained their placements as if I did not understand storytelling. She told me a story about her own wedding that changed every time she told it. She ended by saying that my only job was to be generous with my smile. I said I could do that. That evening, the sky over the East River felt like glass. I stood on the balcony of my apartment and listened to the city click and exhale beneath me. A ferry's horn marked the hour. Somewhere a music rehearsal drifted through an open window. I thought of the plaza and the polite laughter and the line on a page that named me an image to be managed. I thought of the thread of messages where a man I had promised to marry treated me like a paint color. I thought of a line in a contract that belonged to me because I had always read to the end. They think this is a wedding day, I said to the lights. I call it a broadcast date. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 3. The Ceremony of Lies. The sky over Bridgehampton was the color of pale champagne when the cars began to wind up the long drive, headlights flicking across the clipped hedges and the stone lions at the gate. Inside the estate, the ballroom had been transformed into a golden engine. Chandeliers trembled with light. The parquet floor gleamed like a stage. banners with the crest had been tucked so artfully into the floral installations that they read as decoration until you stood still and realized you were surrounded by a family name. There were 8 camera platforms, each with a dedicated operator wearing a discreet headset. Someone had stenciled the words "Sterling Legacy" on a mirrored wall near the dais. From a distance, it looked like scripture. 300 guests arrived as if choreographed by a single thought. The editors and anchors took the seats with the cleanest sightlines. The board members sat near the center aisle. Old friends of the family hovered by the bar, where a pair of bartenders smiled like trained diplomats. A quartet in the gallery tested a gentle standard that did not require anyone to feel anything. It all felt expensive and inevitable. Eleanor glided to the front and took the handheld microphone, the gold cuff at her wrist, catching the light like a signal flare. She looked radiant and untouchable in a gown the same pale shade as the sky, and she waited until the room hushed in that obedient way rooms do when they have been paid to hush. She said they had watched me grow from a promising young professional into a woman worthy of a great legacy. She said the family had always believed in lifting others, that I had been rescued from a small life to join a larger one, and that today they were giving me a place I deserved. The laugh that followed was not cruel. It was simply unconsidered. I smiled as if we had agreed on a joke. I could feel Nathaniel's presence before I saw him. He was always good at entering a scene late enough to be noticed and early enough to own it. He walked onto the dais, kissed his mother on the cheek, and turned to the crowd with the slightly abashed smile that made donors loosen checks. He reached for the microphone. Eleanor put it into his palm like a torch. He looked at me and then at the cameras. He said I had always promised to bring light into his life, then paused just long enough to let the line breathe. He added that he hoped it was not the kind of light that follows a scandal. The room rewarded him. A clean laugh, a few nods. He glanced at me for approval the way people do when they believe they have charmed you into complicity. I stepped forward and rested my fingers against the side of the microphone. My voice felt steady in my throat, as if every rehearsal I had ever run had been for this. I thanked him. I said that since we were talking about light, it might be a good moment to let it fall on a few things. The hush that followed was softer than silence. It was attention waking up. Behind us, the giant screen that had cycled through safe photos of childhood birthdays and summer trips and charity galas shifted. For a breath, the image faltered as if the slideshow had been startled. Then the first document appeared, an internal email. The subject line was a sentence imagineered for a future that did not include me. I watched the words resolve as the cameras auto-adjusted, and the room collectively leaned forward. On the left margin, a cursor traced the date. On the right, the draft of a statement mapped to a calendar. The phrase "brand reset" sat in the middle of the paragraph like a pebble you swallow by mistake. Then a second screen populated beside it with an attachment icon that opened to a project schedule that married our vows to an investor call and a foundation pledge. The rows and columns gleamed as neatly as any floral arch. There was no sound at first. Then there was the small sound of one person realizing what they were looking at and inhaling. Then the larger sound of 100 people remembering to breathe. Eleanor took one step toward the tech desk and lifted her hand like a conductor. Her voice did not reach for charm. She said to turn it off. The screen did not obey. I could feel the cameras recalibrating their lenses, deciding where to look. I kept my eyes on the display. The next document was a summary of a staff dismissal that had been sold to the press as a necessary cleaning of the stables. Next to it, in unembellished sentences, was the reality. The woman's name was Marissa. Her only sin had been to be young and visible when a senior executive needed a narrative that pushed blame down the hallway and out the door. A thread of messages between Nathaniel and a private contact appeared beside the memo. He asked for language that would sound decisive and kind. He asked for a phrase that would make donors feel better about continuing to give. Eleanor's voice cut again, sharper this time. She said to cut the feed. She said to kill the screen. She said to do it now. A lighting technician looked at her, then looked at the stage manager, then looked at the camera director. I saw the small panic that runs through a crew when the plan they were given is not the plan unfolding. The chandeliers dimmed and then rose again as if the room were blinking. The screen held its image. In the front row, a former senator put on his glasses as if that could make the content kinder. Then the picture faded to black for a heartbeat. and the second act began. The audio was clean. It came from the distributed system rather than the stage rig. It filled the gold room without strain. Eleanor's voice was unmistakable. She was speaking in the tone she used in boardrooms when no one had a reason to film. She said that love was not the product. She said that story was the product. She said that people forgive when we give them a better plot. She laughed. Someone else in the recording tried to laugh with her and failed. A ripple moved through the crowd the way wind moves through tall grass. The cameras found her face and held there. She did not run. She was too proud for that. She lifted her chin a fraction and smoothed the front of her gown with a hand that did not shake. Her eyes were stone and calculation. I took the microphone gently from its stand and let the quiet return. I said that some of the people in this room had hired me to manage their difficult days. I said I had built strategies for them when they had nothing but excuses and fear. I said that tonight I had offered the Sterlings their own masterclass. They were welcome. Nathaniel stepped closer, his expression a complicated map of outrage and caution. His voice tried for intimate and landed on brittle. He said my name like an admonishment. He said this was not the time. He said we could discuss whatever concerns I had offline. I looked at him and saw the boy he must have been coached on how to steer any moment back to his comfort. I spoke softly enough that the microphones had to lean in. I said that the time had been chosen by the people who turned a wedding into an event. I said that we were already very much online. He reached out like he might take my hand to steady the optics. I let my arm fall to my side and watched his fingers hang there and then retreat. Somewhere to my left, a camera changed focus with a small mechanical sigh. On the screen behind us, the final set of messages appeared. Nathaniel and the contact saved as MC discussed the tone to strike when the public needed reassurance that the union signaled a new chapter for the brand. Several guests stood. A few were very old and a few were very young, and both groups looked equally bewildered. A producer whispered into a headset. Security shifted their weight toward the aisles, not because there was a danger, but because bodies trained to move on command still move when there is no command that fits. Eleanor found her voice again, and this time she made it warm. She said that families have complicated internal discussions, and that out of context, even the kindest plans can sound unkind. She said she was sorry that a private brainstorming session had been misunderstood. She asked the audience for grace. The audio filing played again without commentary the part where she said they did not need love if they had a better story. The room listened to her ask for grace while hearing her sell the idea of replacing empathy with narrative. The contradiction sat between her and the cameras like furniture no one could pretend not to see. Lydia stood near the rear tech console, her hair tied back in a workmanlike knot, her hands loose at her sides. She did not look at me. She did not need to. We had built systems together that could survive a hurricane of hands. The content was mirrored to a secondary server and a tertiary line. The backup was housed off-site. The distribution to the network pool had been triggered by a simple timer. This did not require intervention. It required integrity. I lifted my left hand and slid the ring free. The weight of it had never felt like mine. I set it on the acrylic of the lectern where it looked like another piece of the room's decor. For a moment, I allowed myself to consider the version of this day that I would have wanted. A smaller room, a real piano. My father reading a poem and crying at the part he pretended not to expect. A cake chosen because it tasted like summer, not because it matched an emblem. Nathaniel spoke again, a thread of anger stitching through the charm. He said the materials were stolen. He said the context was manipulated. He said this was petty and cruel and careerist. I said that truth could not be stolen from the people who made it. I said the context was the context of a wedding turned into a corporate show. I said that if we wanted to talk about petty, we could do it in front of the contracts. He took a breath as if to shout. The camera facing us read the breath as a flinch. The quartet in the gallery had stopped playing hours ago, or minutes ago, or never started at all. Time in rooms like that behaves like an obedient dog until it does not. I let the silence lengthen until it felt like a decision instead of a failure. I turned my face to the lens nearest me and spoke without raising my voice. I said this was not a wedding. I said it was a revelation. For a long second, no one moved. Then the room erupted into the sound of people deciding who they were going to be next. The board members became advisors. The editors became witnesses. The anchors became anchors. Phones rose like a second canopy of lights. Security spread in a line that suggested purpose rather than force. Somewhere near the rear, the stage manager tapped a console that was no longer in control of anything and then dropped his hand with the relief that comes when you are told the choice is not yours. Lydia touched her earpiece and gave a small nod to no one I could see. That tiny movement told me the redundancies were live and the mirrors were clean. The live stream could not be stopped by any one person in that building. It had already left the property. It had already learned to live without permission. I took one step back from the lectern and let the ring sit where I had left it. A photographer in the side aisle captured it from a low angle against the field of flowers and logos, so that in the viewfinder it looked like a moon rising over a manufactured horizon. Eleanor's gaze followed mine to that spot and then away as if refusing to bless what she could not control. Nathaniel's eyes darted toward the nearest exit and then returned to me, trying to find a script that could keep him on the stage. I wanted to say that I was sorry, not to them, to the version of myself who had believed long enough to plan a dress fitting and a seating chart. But sorrow belonged to private rooms. Here there was simply the work. I shifted the microphone on its stand until the cable stopped humming. I thanked the guests for their patience. I thanked the staff who had worked hard to execute a plan they had not designed. I said the rest of the evening would be altered and that those who needed to leave could leave, and those who wished to stay could listen. As I said it, I knew that nothing I offered them could make this feel tidy. Truth is not tidy, it is exact. In the corner of my eye, I saw Marcus at the back of the room, hands crossed loosely, eyes sharp and unsurprised. He had the posture of a man watching a verdict he had already read. He inclined his head once. It steadied me more than I expected. I let the microphone rest. I felt the air move across my collarbones like a new season arriving in a single breath. The chandeliers steadied. The screen paused on a final frame in which no one looked like a hero. Somewhere outside the ballroom doors, a surge of voices rose, the separated sound of press that had been waiting in the polite distance. I did not turn toward it yet. I kept my focus on the room I had just changed, and I held it until I knew it could not change back. If this story touched you, please subscribe, and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 4. When the lights turned on too bright. The first sound was chairs skimming the parquet, then the low percussion of voices shifting from ceremony to self-preservation. Guests stood in small waves, some careful, some clumsy. A few moved toward me with the vague intention of comfort, and then turned aside as if the air between us had become too bright to cross. The camera platforms pivoted hunting reactions, and the chandeliers threw their gilded light onto faces that had trained their whole lives to appear composed. Composure did not hold. At the back doors, a knot of press had gathered, corralled, until now, by velvet ropes and polite requests. When security opened one panel to let a vendor slip through, the ropes faltered, and the room inhaled a different kind of oxygen. Microphones lifted. A boom pole cleared a floral arch. A young reporter mouthed a question, and then realized her voice was audible and asked it out loud. Eleanor spoke first, crisp and gracious. She said we would pause to address a technical issue. She thanked our guests for their patience. Her tone fell into the hushed space with the authority of a practiced host. It might have worked if the screens behind us had gone black. They did not. They held the last frame like a portrait of a truth that had finally been asked to sit still. Marcus stepped in through the side aisle, moving like a man accustomed to walking courts and boardrooms without announcing himself. He wore a navy suit that did not glare under the lights and carried a slim document holder in one hand. When he reached the edge of the dais, he lifted the holder slightly and waited until Eleanor met his eyes. She nodded because power knows power even when it does not welcome it. He offered the paper to the stage manager first, then to a sterling attorney who had arrived so quietly I had not noticed him. Marcus spoke softly, so I watched mouths. The attorney frowned, then read again, then looked at Eleanor. Marcus turned and caught my eye, the smallest confirmation passing between us like a sealed envelope. The broadcast rights were where we had left them, with me. Eleanor tried a new route. She crossed to the tech console and leaned down to address the director, all warmth and gravity. She said we would stop the stream now. She said the family would release a statement at a later time. The director looked at his board as if a button might grow a new function under his palm. He shook his head once. The stream was leaving this room through pipes the Sterlings did not own. I heard my publicist instincts count the beats. 1, 2, 3. Then the Sterling press officer raised her hand toward the cameras the way someone might try to soothe a skittish horse. She began to speak, but her phone vibrated and then rang again. So did the phones of 3 editors in the front row and a producer near the door. The alerts marching across screens were the same. A press note from Hartman Agency with a subject line that said, "We will not be making this private," and an attachment that detailed the provenance of the materials aired, the chain of custody, the production partnership, and the legal grounds for distribution. A second document linked to an open repository containing the files shown in the room. The timestamp preceded the first slideshow image by several minutes. Lydia did not do theater, she did records. A reporter spoke clearly near the back. He asked Eleanor if she stood by the words attributed to her. Another asked Nathaniel whether Marissa Cole had been terminated for optics. Another asked me whether I intended to proceed with the ceremony. The questions ricocheted gently off one another, more curious than cruel. A woman with a local affiliate badge asked if we had a statement as a couple, and smiled at the word couple, as if it were a small animal she knew would not survive the night. Security widened their stance near the aisle, competent and calm. I stepped down from the dais. My dress lifted and fell with the careful breath of fabric, doing what it was told. I walked past 2 cameras and a table full of place cards that suddenly looked like name tags at a conference that had lost its theme. At the door to the hall, a flash cluster went off, little white suns popping and fading. Someone called my name. I did not turn. I had an appointment with the threshold. Nathaniel caught up with me just beyond the ballroom where the corridor narrowed and the sound of the crowd softened into a pulse. He reached for my wrist and then thought better of it and took my hand instead. The gesture was almost tender. His grip said urgency. He said my name the way he had said it in doorways at 2 a.m. when we were tired and kind. Then he asked what I wanted. I looked at him and at the camera hovering discreetly to our left. I asked him if he was asking as a man or as a brand. He clenched his jaw. He said to stop it and we could work this out. He said he could make the next quarter mine. He said money and equity and property and a foundation wing. He said I could write the statement and get the credit. He said his mother would apologize. He said things he believed were currencies. I said I did not want his money or his equity. I said I wanted him to hold his eyes on the lens and tell the truth without a director behind the glass. He followed my gaze to the camera. It lifted a fraction. The red record light winked. He swallowed. He tried a smile that knew it was failing. He said the emails were taken out of context, that what I was doing would hurt the wrong people, that we were complicated, that we could be better, that this would follow him forever. Then, as if remembering the old scripts, he softened his voice. He said he never meant to humiliate me. He said he had been scared. I believed the last sentence. Fear had a smell I knew. Flashes strobed again, bright enough to paint a moment onto the inside of my eyes. His face lit and flattened the lines around his mouth, deepening the expensive tan, losing its warmth. In the frame, I knew a home audience would see a man who looked like a headline and a woman who had become a fact. The corridor amplified the clicks and the polite shuffles of feet. I could hear Lydia in my mind counting exposure values and shrugging at fate. I let his hand go. He understood he had lost something he could not invoice. He dropped his gaze just enough to read his options and found none that did not involve grace. He did not know how to stand there and choose grace. He stepped back a half step. He whispered so soft I almost missed it. He asked if I would marry him anyway. I looked at the gold line of the ballroom door and at the ring sleeping on the lectern inside, and at the blue vein in his temple pulsing like a metronome. I did not say yes, I did not say no. I thanked him for asking me in a corridor instead of a press release, and then I walked into the lobby where the air smelled like lilies and glass cleaner. Outside the estate, the sky had gone dark and the line of cars had become a necklace of taillights. Press vans hummed. A drone paused above the lawn and then moved away as a production assistant waved it off the property line. I stood on the stone steps and let the night rest on my shoulders like a shawl. Flash bulbs started again, a gentle machine of attention. Someone asked if I felt vindicated. Someone asked if I regretted the timing. Someone asked if this was a feminist act. I answered none of those questions. I said thank you to the staff who were holding the doors and signaled to the guards that no one needed to be pushed. It is possible to leave a room loudly without raising your voice. Marcus joined me on the steps. He cleared the small space to my right with one glance, and the cameras respected it. He spoke without moving his lips much. He said the filings were in motion. He said the servers were clean and mirrored, and that the letters to networks had landed. He said the family's outside counsel had emailed him, and that the phrases they used suggested they knew the field had tilted. I asked if the police would be called. He said there was nothing to call them about unless someone intended to report truth as theft. He put a business card in my palm, though we both knew I had his number. He told me to get in the car that Lydia had ordered and to answer my phone when he called in the morning. He did not say he was proud of me. Marcus never spent words on sentiment in public. He nodded once and stepped down to speak with a reporter from a paper that still liked ink. The ride back to Brooklyn tasted like metal and relief. Lydia sat in the back seat beside me, hair undone, face steady. She opened her laptop and tilted the screen so I could see numbers rolling in from platforms I had not touched since I stepped away from the firm. The stream had doubled and then tripled and then cleared 1 million before we hit the expressway. Comment columns exploded into arguments and confessions and jokes, and then surprisingly fast into a language of ethics. There is a particular tone people use when they remember they have standards. It was in the feed now like fresh air. She said only one sentence. She said she had timed the press note to arrive 10 minutes before the first slide because she had never trusted a single cable when a network was at stake. I told her I loved her, which I do and always will. By the time I got upstairs, the dress had begun to feel like a costume from a play that had closed. I stepped out of it carefully, leaving the pearls on the dresser as if they might learn something useful there. I pulled on a bathrobe and sat on the couch. The apartment smelled like coffee grounds and fresh paint from the hallway. I turned on the television and muted it and watched the captions carry my name like a caution and a compliment. The phone rang. Lydia again. Her voice had laughter in it, but the tender kind. She said I had done it. I said I had only swept the floor that other people had littered. She said to let her pretend she was impressed. I said she could do that in the morning. We said goodnight like soldiers in a trench who know dawn will come whether they want it or not. I slept a few hours and woke before light because I always wake before light when I have to choose who to be. I made coffee and did not drink it. I stood at the window and slid my finger down the cold glass until a taxi turned the corner and made a small orange line appear. Then I turned the television back on and put the volume at a whisper. The ticker on the business channel marched numbers with the cheerful cruelty of markets. The sterling media line was red. The anchor did not try to hide the energy that comes into a newsroom when a giant trips. The board showed a drop that would hurt. They cut to a statement from the foundation confirming that Eleanor had stepped down temporarily to avoid distractions. The release used the word transition, as if it were a cloud that could shade anything. My phone lit with a new name, Marissa. Her message was 4 sentences long. She said she had spoken with 3 reporters and had told the truth. She said she was sorry for her part in hurting me. She said she had been scared and young and liked being close to power until she saw it up close. She said thank you for turning on the light. I typed back a single sentence. I told her to take care of herself and to ask for counsel before agreeing to sit under hot lights. She responded with a heart that I did not understand but accepted. By midday, the headlines had settled into a rhythm the way conversations do once everyone agrees on the nouns. Sterling wedding livestream becomes corporate scandal. Family brand faces reckoning after on-air revelations. Bride was producer and whistleblower. In the panel shows the tone moved from gossip to ethics and back again. A law professor explained contract language so cleanly I wanted to hire her. A former anchor said he felt betrayed by the idea of story as commodity, and then admitted he had sold plenty of it himself. I did not give interviews. Marcus told me to let the paper speak for a day. He said the first thing a storm tries to do is pull you into its wind. He said the second is to make you feel important for surviving it. At dusk, Lydia came over with takeout and left it on the counter. We ate standing up, reading captions, sometimes laughing at how little and how much a world can change in 24 hours. When she left, she touched the doorframe like a habit for luck. Night laid down across the city, and then lifted again in spots where neon insisted on mourning. I curled on the end of the couch with the remote near my hand and my phone face down. Somewhere a neighbor practiced piano slow scales, 3 notes forward and 1 back patient as a metronome. The television cut to a glossy package with graphics and a title that did not embarrass me. The PR queen who exposed her own wedding. I watched my name glide under that line, steady as a boat in a harbor finally free of a rope. I let myself smile, small and private and real. Finally, a headline that told the truth. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 5. After the wedding, only truth remained. 2 months passed before I saw my name fade from the ticker. The noise slowed, then softened until the headlines about other people replaced mine. The world moved on, but I had no desire to follow it back into silence. I had learned too much about what silence can cost. In early winter, I opened the doors to a new office on a quiet street in downtown Manhattan. Frost rimmed the windows, and the sign out front read, Hartman Integrity Media. It was small, practical, unglamorous, exactly what I wanted. We specialized in transparent crisis communication, a contradiction some people found impossible until they saw it work. Lydia ran production again, her desk already drowning in wires and notebooks. Marcus helped set up the legal framework so cleanly that investors who had once turned away were calling to meet. The same people who had called me reckless now wanted to learn the formula for exposure without destruction. Online, a movement had taken its own breath. Someone on social media had clipped part of my wedding broadcast the moment I said this was not a wedding, it was a revelation. The clip traveled through timelines faster than I could blink. They called it #BrideWithProof. Within days, women from corporate offices, universities, and small towns began sharing their own stories of manipulation and image. Some were quiet victories, some were loud reckonings. None were theatrical. They were proof that sometimes the softest voice can echo the farthest. Sterling Media, meanwhile, was unraveling in slow motion. Investigations opened into their tax structure, their public funding, and the charitable arm Eleanor had once paraded before cameras. She resigned publicly, with a carefully worded statement about reflection and new beginnings. Nathaniel vanished after one final post about privacy, then deactivated every account he had ever used. Reports said he was living somewhere in Florida, managing what remained of a brand that now carried my name more prominently than his. One morning in February, I sat for an interview with Charlotte Wynne, a journalist I respected because she had never confused gossip with journalism. She was calm, her questions shaped by curiosity rather than hunger. "Do you consider what you did revenge?" she asked, folding her notes. I smiled because the question had followed me like a shadow. "No," I said, "I just gave the truth a microphone of its own." Charlotte nodded, not rushing the silence that followed. "And if you could go back, I wouldn't change the method," I told her, only the trust I gave before earning proof. When the article came out a week later, her headline was simple: "The PR queen who believed honesty could trend." It made me laugh, and for once I didn't mind being a headline. A few days later, I found an envelope in my mailbox, thick ivory paper with my name written in a hand that looked almost fragile. No return address. Inside was a photograph from the wedding day. In it, Eleanor and I were side by side under the chandeliers, smiling at something just out of frame. Her handwriting on the back was uneven, the ink slightly smudged. Maybe I taught my son to love image more than people. I sat on the couch and held the picture in both hands until the light from the window faded across it. I did not feel anger, only a quiet recognition that remorse, when it comes, is its own kind of grace. I placed the letter in the bottom drawer of my desk, not to keep it safe, but to remind myself that truth has a cost, even for those who resist it. By spring, invitations began arriving for conferences and panels, the kind I used to help clients avoid. One in particular caught my attention: the annual Ethics in Media Summit in Los Angeles. The organizer asked if I would speak on transparency and control. I said yes. I thought it fitting to end the year by talking about how stories can live cleanly in the light. The conference was held in a glass building that looked like it had been carved out of sunlight. Hundreds of people filled the seats: industry veterans, young reporters, producers. When I stepped onto the stage, the hush reminded me of that ballroom months ago, but the air here felt different. It carried expectation, not judgment. Behind me, a large screen flickered to life with a still from the wedding broadcast. Not the scandalous parts, just a frame of me standing at the microphone, the chandeliers dim behind. I told the audience that I wasn't proud of the chaos, only of the clarity that came after. I spoke about responsibility, about how silence can be strategy when it protects truth, but also how it can become complicity if it protects lies. I told them that every publicist, journalist, and communicator faces the same temptation to polish what should be raw, to script what should be real. When I finished, I played a brief clip from the live stream. It wasn't the email or the betrayal. It was the moment I took off the ring and said, "This isn't a wedding, it's a revelation." I let the line hang in the room. Then I looked up and said softly, "Silence is not weakness. Sometimes it's just the pause before you speak at the right time." For a long moment, no one moved. Then the applause came steady and full. People stood. Some wiped their eyes. Lydia was in the second row recording it all on her phone, smiling the way only someone who has seen you at your smallest can smile at your strength. After the session, Marcus found me backstage. He handed me a folder with new clients waiting for consultation. He said, "Looks like truth finally found its market." I laughed and told him he should trademark that before someone else did. That night I walked out onto the terrace overlooking the city. The Pacific air was soft and salt bright. Down below, Los Angeles glimmered like 1,000 open screens. I thought about all the versions of myself that had stood in front of microphones, crafting words for other people's redemption. For the first time, I wasn't speaking to sell a story. I was speaking to end one. When I returned to New York, the office had a new rhythm. Younger voices filled the space interns who said they wanted to work in media because of what they had seen in that video. One afternoon, a student who reminded me of my younger self stopped by my desk with a question. "Do you ever regret going public?" she asked. I looked at her nervous, curious, full of ideas she hadn't yet tested. "No," I said. "Regret belongs to people who had a choice to do nothing." I didn't. She smiled, scribbled something in her notebook, and walked away. The hum of the office returned, full of keys and phones and the low thrum of people trying to do things right. That evening, as the city outside my window sank into gold, I sat down to record the final segment for a documentary project that Charlotte was producing. It was a follow-up, something to close the story properly. The crew was small, 2 lights, 1 camera, quiet professionals, who let me think between takes. I looked at the lens and saw my reflection faintly in the glass. My own eyes steady, no longer the eyes of a woman trying to prove herself, just a woman who had already done it. "They planned a perfect wedding," I said, voice calm and even. "I planned a better truth. If someone ever makes you feel small inside your own story, remember this. You have the right to rewrite it." The light above the camera blinked, signaling the end of the recording. I exhaled slowly. The room was still. Lydia clapped once, quiet but certain. Outside, the city kept moving. Somewhere, a new scandal was already writing itself. Somewhere, another woman was learning that silence could be a weapon or a wound depending on how she used it. I turned off the lamp on my desk and let the room fall into shadow. For the first time in a long while, the darkness didn't feel like hiding. It felt like peace.